The year is 1931, and Leon Trotsky sits in his villa in Turkey, cast out from Russia, never to return. Once the sword of the revolution, he now takes up the pen. His activity has provoked a response not from Stalin directly, but from one of his main literary enforcers, Emilian Yaroslavsky. The bourgeois reactionary press has been enriched by a new employee, he chides. Undeterred, Trotsky signs a contract with Granite, a publishing house based in Berlin. Only a few years later, it would be done in by the Nazis. But for now, Trotsky's books fly off the presses, even making their way onto Stalin's bookshelf. My Life, Permanent Revolution, History of the Russian Revolution. The goal was to set the record straight. After all, present day's battles were being fought with yesterday's facts. Trotsky was being written out of Soviet history faster than it could be written in the first place. Yaroslavsky and the rest of that party machine dutifully did the editing, censoring, and falsifying. He called it the Stalin School of Falsification. In a previous video, you may recall I used a quote from this book, and there were a number of comments skeptical of this, or going so far as to say the quote was almost certainly a forgery. After all, who would trust Trotsky? Now, the only reason why I used the book in that video was because within it, Trotsky reprinted a certain government document verbatim, and I was quoting that document, not any of Trotsky's arguments about it. But that raises the question, how do we know if this document is genuine or not? What is the Stalin School of Falsification anyway? And what do the Soviet archives have to say? The year is 1917, November 1st in the old style, 1 week after the October insurrection. Though the Bolsheviks have secured Petrograd relatively easily, they're met with a counterattack from Kerensky, and a battle is still being waged in the streets of Moscow. Meanwhile, one of Russia's largest unions, Vindicate, threatens strikes to force the Bolsheviks to work with the other socialist parties. And a number of party members, the Bolshevik moderates, argue the party should, hammering out a rough agreement with Vindicate in the early morning hours. Later that day, Pravda runs an alert on its front page. An emergency meeting will convene at 7 p.m., room 19 at the Smolny Institute. Members of the Petrograd Party Committee shuffle into the room for 7 o'clock. Actually, closer to 8. According to the registration sheet, at least a dozen of them are present, plus other top Bolshevik leaders, a dozen members of the Central Committee. A brief report is read out on the Vindicate situation. Then Lenin takes the floor, speaking sharply against compromise, against Kamenev's and Zinoviev's opposition, against the negotiations with Vindicate. I'm not in a position to listen to this calmly. I consider it treason, he says. What do you want? A stabbing to begin? Only the proletariat can lead the country. And the agreement. He then turns to Trotsky and says something monumental. 1927. 10 years have passed. Lenin is gone, and the conflict with Vindicate is but a distant memory. By order of the Commission on the History of the October Revolution, or its parts, Praskovia Kodili is compiling the minutes of the Petrograd Committee meetings for publication in an anniversary collection. She gets to the minutes for the November 1st meeting, but there's a problem. Meanwhile, the press has been running articles non-stop about Trotsky, Kamenev, and Zinoviev, all enemies of Stalin at this point. The three have become equated, with Trotsky being lumped in with the other two's opposition to the seizure of power. In fact, it's now labeled characteristically Trotskyist, as Sergei Eisenstein's October would soon immortalize. When the decisive hour was upon them, Trotsky demanded to wait. It was Trotsky that was the ne'er-do-well. Thus, when his part sent out a questionnaire to the participants of the October Revolution to collect their testimony, Trotsky replied cynically, "What is the point of asking me about my participation in the October Revolution when the entire official apparatus, including yours, is working to conceal, destroy, or at least distort any traces of my participation?" Nonetheless, he would pen an extensive letter pointing out all the minute ways in which his involvement was being erased. And he also pointed out the contradictory about-face of his comrades. Nowadays, Stalin liked to claim, Trotsky did not, and could not, have played any special role in the October insurrection. Yet Trotsky reminded them how in 1918, Stalin wrote in Pravda, all the work of practical organization of the insurrection was conducted under the direct leadership of the chairman of the Petrograd Soviet, Trotsky. It can be said with certainty that the swift transition of the garrison to the side of the Soviet and the skillful execution of the work of the Military Revolutionary Committee, the party owes first and foremost to Comrade Trotsky. This segment was conspicuously omitted, by the way, in all subsequent reprints, such as Stalin's collected works. Then, even worse, were East Part's own historians. Only a few years prior, Yaroslavsky had written of the brilliant literary activity of Comrade Trotsky, a man profoundly devoted to the revolution, one of the recognized leaders of the most revolutionary army and of the greatest revolution in the world. His exaggerated praise now turned to exaggerated denouncement. Plus, Trotsky argued, it was foolish to paint him as always antagonistic to Lenin. Just recall the meeting on November 1st. Back at East Part, Kudili is chewing over the November 1st minutes, unsure what to do with them. Or at least this is how Trotsky would imagine it played out. Get East Part Central on the phone. East Part Central picks up the phone. Get me the Secretariat. The Secretariat picks up the phone. Shut it down. Yank the minutes. The collection is printed, but there's a conspicuous absence. It jumps from October 29th to November 2nd. Interestingly, it stated in the minutes on the 29th, the next meeting was to be held on the 1st at 7 p.m. Pravda said there was a meeting on the 1st at 7 p.m. But then, there's no meeting on the 1st at 7 p.m. Also, at the November 4th meeting, someone refers back to the viewpoint of Lenin and Trotsky. What was that all about? It's as if a meeting disappeared into thin air. The only problem is, they failed to destroy the evidence. 1929, the 12th anniversary of the revolution, and the first that Trotsky would be celebrating from abroad. In his possession are a number of government documents, letters, and so on from the old days, and evidently, he has obtained the original proof sheets for Kudili's collection. The magazine Bulletin of the Opposition publishes a photograph of the November 1st proof, showing the meeting existed after all. It's marked with a slash across the front, and a note from Kudili on the side. It reads, "The speech of V.I. Lenin was recorded by the secretary with large omissions and abbreviations of individual words and phrases. In places, the recording of his speech cannot be deciphered. Therefore, in order to not present it in a distorted form, this speech is not published." Well, Trotsky would call this a poor excuse, arguing that, while it was sometimes difficult to record Lenin's fast talking, the transcript more or less captured what he said. Just like his speech at every other meeting, all the minutes looked like that. So why were these minutes really not published? Meanwhile, in Moscow, another East Part employee, Max Savilyev, is working on a collection of Central Committee minutes and comes across the November 1st meeting. He notes that in addition to the minutes taken by Secretary Yelena Stasova, there is actually another, longer document in the party archives, 5 pages front and back. Based on this, he roughly describes the speeches given, but doesn't transcribe them all verbatim. He also acknowledges that a resolution of Trotsky's was voted on and passed, but writes, "The text of Trotsky's resolution has not survived." 1931. Trotsky is writing the Stalin School of Falsification. It will again contain a reprint of the November 1st minutes, but in the Soviet Union, it falls on deaf ears. Meanwhile, in Leningrad, someone named Vitaly Startsev is born. One day, he will enroll at the Leningrad Institute of History, training under S.N. Volk, later being regarded as one of the most important, authoritative, and influential researchers of the history of our country. 1989. Trotsky and Stalin are both long dead. As part of the reforms of perestroika, past moments are being written about in a new light. Documents from the archives are being published. A more comprehensive image of the revolution emerges. Many formerly condemned comrades are rehabilitated. although Trotsky himself never is. Nonetheless, there's a mini renaissance of rediscovering his work. In the Soviet academic journal, Questions of History, a monumental new article appears. It's that Leningrad historian Vitaly Startsev, and he's quoting and analyzing the School of Falsification. It's the first time the work has ever legally appeared in the Soviet Union. But that's just the beginning. The full book is reprinted in Moscow the following year, and in the Soviet archives, what is today the Russian State Archive of Social Political History, researchers dig up the original minutes of that fabled November 1st meeting. So what did Lenin actually say? I'm not in a position to listen to this calmly. I consider it treason. What do you want? A stabbing to begin? Only the proletariat can lead the country. And the agreement. Agreement. I can't even speak about that seriously. Trotsky long ago said that unification is impossible. Trotsky understood this, and from that time on, there has been no better Bolshevik. As for the so-called viewpoint of Lenin and Trotsky, they were in agreement about not compromising with Vikshel. Trotsky was in opposition to the Bolshevik moderates, not a member of them, and thus the pieces start to fall into place. He's part hid the minutes because they would have proven false the narrative that Trotsky was the arch-oppositionist to Lenin here. And on the contrary, the meeting actually had an embarrassingly explicit example of Lenin praising Trotsky. Also, for those curious, if Stalin was at the meeting, he evidently didn't say anything. And the following day, he signed his name in agreement with Trotsky and Lenin. Trotsky would later describe this as Stalin essentially being a centrist. They were actually on the same side here. It's just that in Trotsky's eyes, Stalin was a less consequential party, hence the folly of Stalin later trying to erase Trotsky while elevating his own involvement. The meeting was a prime example of Trotsky being a leading voice, while Stalin was literally silent. Yet another reason to sweep it under the rug. Now, when we compare Trotsky's documents to the official minutes in the archives, they're the same, pretty much word for word identical. Trotsky did state he deleted a few half-formed or incomprehensible phrases for the reprint, and sure enough, there's a couple mumblings here removed, a line which Abrasimova et al. Describe as indecipherable as well. But then when we compare the actual speech, they're identical. There has been no better Bolshevik. There has been no better Bolshevik. If you still don't believe me, let's take a look at the actual record from the Soviet archives. So here we have the minutes of the Petrograd Committee on November 1st. And if we go to this page here, the handwriting's a bit hard to read, but here we see what do they want? For a knife fight to break out? Only the proletariat can lead the country. And here's where it starts to trail off for a little bit, but something like, what about the agreement? The SRs sympathize with us if ... crossed out lines, a fairy tale. Grandpa for the turnip, etc., which is a reference to a Russian fairy tale. And then if we come down to here, we see I can't even talk about this seriously. Trotsky long ago said that unification was impossible. Trotsky understood this. And from then on, there was no better Bolshevik. When School of Falsification was reintroduced in the Soviet Union, scholars noted Trotsky's faithful reprinting of documents, as well as his quoting of works of Lenin previously unknown to the public, making the book a valuable source of documentary materials. As the Soviet historians Vilkova and Nina Rokov wrote, the materials and documents reproduced in the book have been carefully verified with the originals stored in the Central Party archives. It's necessary to note the very scrupulous attitude of Trotsky to all documentary materials, and above all, Lenin's, which he uses without any exaggerations. A comparison of the Lenin documents published by Trotsky with the originals in the Central Archives confirm their authenticity. Moreover, the book was an incredibly valuable source for understanding the experiences, perspective, opinions, and even flaws of Trotsky as a person, aiding in a more nuanced understanding of early Soviet leadership. Now, am I trying to argue that Trotsky was right about everything after all, and is completely politically vindicated? No, not at all. Rather, this is just an illustrative example of how in the 1920s, Soviet history itself was one of the key weapons wielded in the battle for political and ideological orthodoxy. As the ongoing historiography series will illustrate, Stalin cultivated a certain historical narrative that was favorable to himself and his goals, while Trotsky did the same. In the former's case, a considerable industry emerged of party committees, government departments, press outlets, even entertainment, the School of Falsification, if you will, which wrote and rewrote the history of the revolution. This school censored or suppressed certain pieces of evidence, canonizing one interpretation to the detriment of others, and in the process, worked to cement Stalin's position as the school's leading professor.